Have you ever had a client who was doing everything right? They turned up every single session, motivated, engaged. They were ready. They were insightful. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they left every single coaching session saying, "This has been so helpful. Thanks so much." And then they came back the following week, having done nothing. Not because they didn't care, not because they weren't capable, and not because they weren't committed, because they absolutely were. But they'd done nothing. Now, if you're a coach, I want you to think about that client now, because I know you've had them. Because I don't think that your client was resisting your coaching. I think something else was happening. And I think most coach training has unintentionally taught us to look in the wrong place when this happens. And so today I want to show you why brilliant coaching can suddenly stop working when burnout enters the room. And more importantly, what to notice instead. If we've never met before, I'm Kelly Swingler. I'm the Burnoutologist, founder of the Burnout Academy, creator of Burnoutology. And for the last 12 years, I have been researching burnout. I've coached over 700 leaders through it. And I've been asking one question that I couldn't find anyone answering. Why do brilliant coaches sometimes stop getting results with brilliant clients? I'm not talking about occasionally or predictably. I mean again and again, over and over. And what I discovered changed not only how I understand burnout, it completely changed how I coach. Because I realized something that some people, some coaches find uncomfortable. Because it wasn't my coaching questions that were the issue. It wasn't my clients, but it was my understanding of what was happening inside the person, inside that client sitting opposite me in a coaching session. Now, I remember one client in particular. I'll obviously change details to protect confidentiality, but the pattern is one that I've now seen hundreds and hundreds of times. This client was brilliant, right? Exceptionally bright, successful, thoughtful. She climbed the top of her ladder. She was at the top of her game. And she was the kind of client that coaches absolutely love working with. And every month we'd have incredible coaching conversations. And she'd leave saying, "I know exactly what I need to do." But the following week, nothing. Not one action. And as coaches, our minds immediately start making sense of that, don't they, right? Maybe she's avoiding something. Maybe she's frightened of success. Maybe there's a limiting belief. Maybe the goal isn't meaningful enough. Maybe the actions are too big. So that's exactly what I did. I made the actions smaller. I explored beliefs. Together, we looked at her values. We increased her accountability. I changed my coaching and nothing changed. And looking back now, I wasn't coaching someone who lacked motivation. I was coaching someone whose brain, whose body, whose nervous system no longer had the capacity to do what I was asking of it. And that changed everything. Now, not overnight, but it completely changed where I started when I was coaching my clients. And here's what I mean. Traditional coaching, the type that I'm sure we've all been trained in, right? Regardless of which model you trained in, is built on some assumptions. And those assumptions are pretty much the same thing. But it assumes that your client can imagine a different future. It assumes that they can weigh up options. It assumes that they can make decisions. It assumes that they can prioritize, that they can follow through. And those assumptions are perfectly reasonable, right? Until burnout enters the room. Because burnout changes capacity. Doesn't change intelligence, doesn't change ambition or willingness or drive, but it changes capacity. And I think that's one of the biggest things that coaches miss. Because we're often interpreting what we see as a coaching issue, but actually it's a nervous system issue. So can I ask you something? Have you ever worked with a client who says things like, "I just can't think. My brain feels really foggy. I know what I should do. I just can't seem to be doing it. I've read the same page 5 times. Or I can't make simple decisions anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me." or they're telling you that they keep forgetting things, or that they used to be decisive, or they're stood in front of you telling you that they don't recognise themselves anymore. You'd have heard one of those things or more, I'm sure. How did you interpret that? Because I know how I used to. I thought that they were overwhelmed or simply stressed, right? Or I thought that they were avoiding something. But now I hear something very different. I hear a brain that is conserving energy. I hear a nervous system that's been running on high alert for so long that it started shutting down non-essential functions like creativity and innovation. And unfortunately, planning, creative thinking, decision making, even problem solving, those are expensive functions. They're non-essential. But they are exactly what coaching relies on. So let's make this really practical, right? When somebody has been living with chronic stress or prolonged threat, the brain becomes increasingly focused on survival. And it starts asking one question over and over again. Am I safe? Not what's my purpose, not what's my 5-year plan or my next goal or my next mission or vision, not how can I become the best version of myself, but safety first, always. Am I safe? That's not mindset, that's biology. The prefrontal cortex, right, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, impulse control, flexible thinking, decision making, it doesn't have the same resources available when the nervous system becomes survival, or it believes that survival is the priority. So imagine what happens, right? As coaches, we're asking clients to imagine possibilities, to generate options, to create plans, to take action, to reflect. Maybe we're asking them to challenge assumptions or to hold themselves accountable. Now, they are all brilliant coaching questions, but we're asking a brain whose first job has become staying safe those exact same questions. And then we wonder why coaching sometimes feel like we're pushing water uphill. And this was the shift for me. I stopped asking, why aren't my clients taking action? And instead I started asking, what might their nervous system be protecting them from? And they are very, very different questions that come from very, very different places, right? One assumes resistance and the other assumes protection. And protection makes complete and utter sense. But if your nervous system has spent months or even years detecting threat, it isn't going to suddenly relax because your coach asks you a beautiful coaching question. So what do you do instead? Well, this is something that you can use in your very next coaching session, right? Before you ask another powerful coaching question, I want you to pause. I want you to take a breath and I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Right, number 1, does my client currently have capacity or only insight? And insight isn't the same as capacity. Someone can completely understand what needs to change and still have no neurological capacity to make it happen. Number 2, am I coaching the goal or am I coaching the state that the client is currently in? If your client is exhausted or foggy or emotionally flat or highly reactive, then the state they're in may be far more important than the goal that they've bought or the goal that they want to reach as part of these sessions. And number 3, what does this nervous system need before it needs strategy? And sometimes that's slowing down. And sometimes that's regulation. Sometimes that is permission or space. Sometimes it's simply not adding another thing to their to-do list. And this is exactly why within Burnoutology, I teach coaches to begin with state and safety before strategy. Not because strategy isn't important, it absolutely is, but strategy lands differently depending on the state of the nervous system, depending on the person receiving it. And the same coaching question asked on 2 different days can produce 2 completely different responses. And not because the client has changed, but because their capacity has. And that's why I think one of the most important coaching skills of the future won't be asking better questions. It will be recognizing when the brain and nervous system aren't yet able to answer them. Now, if there's one thing I'd love you to take away from this video, it's this, right? The next time a client isn't making progress, don't immediately ask what's stopping them. Instead, ask, what if nothing is wrong with this client at all? What if the issue isn't motivation or commitment or accountability? What if they're trying harder than you've realised, but burnout has fundamentally changed what their brain is capable of accessing right now? That question changed my coaching, and I do think it will change yours too. Now, one of the things I see time and time again is coaches missing the early signs of burnout because we've never been taught what they actually look like in practice. And that's why I've created a burnout assessment specifically to help coaches start recognizing those patterns before deciding how to coach them. Now, if you'd like to explore it, there's a link in the description below. It will take you less than 3 minutes to complete. And I'd love to know in the comments, what's one client you've been thinking about whilst you've been watching this? Don't name them, but think about one client that's come to mind whilst you've been watching this video. Have you ever looked back and realised that they weren't resisting your coaching, they were surviving? Because if this conversation has done anything today, I hope it's reminded you that sometimes the most important shift we make as coaches isn't about learning a better question. It's learning to see our clients differently. Now, of course, if you found this useful, please do give it a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.